Writing from the soul is the mother of all invention, and 21 Grams is back for another season of this exploration. We will look into the artist and the art they create. Except, this season we're adding the questionnaire, invented by the great Melvin P. to go even deeper. They say 21 grams is the weight of the soul, and this show is the scale. So now here's your host for 21 Grams, Joe Compton. Hello, everybody. Yes, we're back on 21 Grams. I'm glad to extend the fourth season here because it gives me opportunities to speak to folks like my guest today, the awesome Daniel Myers. And right off the bat, Daniel, how I always love to start this show is to give you the opportunity to kind of take the mantle for a little bit and tell everybody a little bit about yourself and what you write and what you've got out there, if you don't mind.
I don't mind at all. So I write fantasy. I write pretty much epic fantasy. Alejandro Rising is my current book that's out there. There's also a not novella, I guess it would be, which is Out of the Darklands.
Uh-huh.
And soon coming out, I've got to send it to my last editor here in February, is the second book in the Knight's Trials, which is The Attack on Foresight, which if you've read the first book, it kind of ends with the start of the attack.
Nice.
And if you read book 1.5, Out of the Darklands, then you kind of know the setup for the attack. So it's a fun book. It's a lot more action than the first book, but still advances kind of the overall storyline quite a bit.
Is that expected to come out this year? Did your publisher talk to you about it?
Yes. I'm hoping I had hoped to have it out by the end of the year, but with the editing and everything, it's a process and you have to listen to your editor. So we reworked a lot of it, and I'm still reworking a little part of it, but we'll have that done soon. And then, as I said, my last editor will have it in February. By the end of March, it should be ready to go, and then I can start working on the cover art, and I expect it to be out mid-year.
Awesome. I wanted to kind of pick your brain a little bit and go a little deep right off the bat, because
Sure.
I'm curious from your perspective. Do you feel like the way we view hero, the idea of heroes, do you feel like the way we do in modern times has changed for the good or the worse? Do you feel like there has to be a little bit more humanizing to the hero as opposed to the idealistic nature of what a hero was, maybe since we've been reading and experiencing hero journeys?
So, yes and no.
Okay.
I go back to like mythology and all the flawed heroes you had in Greek mythology. Zeus or whoever, was usually a philanderer but was also a heroic figure.
Mm-hmm.
All of the heroes kind of had their weaknesses or foibles or whatever you will. And that's so when you talk about humanizing them, I think we went through a period where like we had the Superman and the cowboy, the John Wayne style cowboy that was just always good and always did the right thing and, didn't drink and didn't smoke, all that. And we went through a phase, and I think we're returning kind of to more of the classic, which we've had since I'd say the 70s, where more of the humanizing, and even to the point where like now it's like Deadpool and Wolverine. I always loved Wolverine because he killed people. I mean, it was like, no, you're a bad guy, and you're done. And that was one of the complaints I always had about a lot of this comic books was, the good guys always captured the bad guys, and then the bad guys would escape, and then they'd kill a bunch more people, and then the good guys would catch them. And I'm like, you know how many people you're responsible for dying? This guy's superpowered and he's evil. Just get rid of him. But yeah, so I I do. I think our idea of what a hero is constantly changes and evolves, and it kind of reflects society a little bit, and it kind of reflects, what we need and what our values are in that. So you look back at the 50s, we'd just come out of the war. Um, we had this ultimate evil, and U.S. was this ultimate good. So it made sense that a lot of the heroes were ultimate good or ultimate evil. And then we got, you know, Korea, Vietnam, and things became a little more complicated, and it became more of a situation where the heroes reflected us more as the people. Mm-hmm. And not just us Americans, but I mean worldwide. I think that phenomenon is pretty real.
And then we had the Cold War, and that kind of shifted us back a little bit toward that hero tropishness of it a little bit. So
yeah, and fantasy heroes tend to be very good, and I can't say mine are that different, but they tend to, they kill people though, and
yeah.
That's something that you have to address is how do they handle that part of what they do.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because in which the time period in which you kind of circle around and have your settings in, did you find that it was easier to kind of color the hero because of that perspective, or did you feel like there was a little bit more of a searching you had to do to kind of give them a kind of an edge, and then within the context of the world you were building around?
So yeah, I actually nicened up my heroes quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And I part of that was just because I didn't want a vulgar or graphic story.
Sure.
I've said it many times. I have grandchildren. My oldest grandchild is 8 now, and I want them to be able to read these books in a couple years when they're able to read a full novel. So I didn't want it to be, graphic or lewd or anything else. So any of that kind of stuff is really alluded to very, very far away. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we have it all, but it's not like, we don't have any descriptions. It's like, yeah, they're kissing. Okay, that's the end of that scene. You can imagine the rest.
So that being said, do you feel like you go a little bit more the opposite way with the antagonist aspect of it, or do you feel like you have to soften them up too a little bit?
Well, so my whole goal when I was writing the antagonists here was the antagonists are not evil people. Mm-hmm. They have different goals based on their lives, and now they're perceived as probably evil by a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But my main protagonist in the first book is not a bad guy. He just is arrogant and young, and gets drunk and causes some problems, and then his arrogance and his youth come out that he's going to cause a blood feud. Mm-hmm. And especially if he wins the tournament, he's going to cause a lot of problems. But ultimately he's not a bad guy. He just he's a bully, and just like everybody else you see. And I kind of with him wanted to go through the transformation of like Flash and Spider-Man and some of these other shows where people eventually grow out of that, and they're if they're not destroyed or completely eviscerated somehow, they can turn out to be pretty decent characters and actually do the enemy to not enemy to lover but enemy to ally, maybe. So he makes that transition. Shouldn't give away the second book, but anyway, so that's part of it.
Yeah, and that's a real good arc to kind of take a character journey on. I would imagine. I would imagine that's fun to kind of color that and figure out in the beats in the of the story itself to kind of how that transitions. And do you find the art of subtlety to be your friend then in that respect for the aspect of character development in these kind of series that you're in the series that you're really delved into now?
Yeah, I'm trying to be as subtle as possible. Subtlety is not my strength. Who knows me will tell you that. But yeah, so I'm trying to make changes that are small and make sense, and things that happen that kind of have an impact and start them on the way of recognizing their faults and moving forward. So that's the subtlety, if you will. But I'm not a real subtle person, and that actually that's where the editors really help me out a lot.
Nice.
Because they'll either say, "Hey, this seems like a really big change. You need to justify it," or they'll be like, "Hey, I didn't see that coming. You need to give us more rationale behind it." So yeah, either way. Or they'll say too, is like, "Yeah, you are telegraphing this way too early, and see if you can pull back on that." I, as I say, I always listen to my editors and might not do what they suggest, but I at least take into account what they're saying and what their frame of mind is and where they're coming from, and see if it makes sense. And I find it incredibly enriching as far as a writing exercise is to go through that whole process with the editors.
And knowing you're going to be doing multiple books too, that has to play into the thought process of how you're going to arc these characters and the stories themselves, right?
My biggest arguments with the editors is they're like, "Well, this is like, why you have this? And why do you introduce this character? They don't do anything." It's like, well, they come up in book 3. And well, they're not in this book, but they're going to have an impact. And so we have to have it. And that's actually the whole reason for the book 1.5 was there was a lot of stuff that just cluttered up book 1. And then so I shoved it in the front of book 2. But then it made book 2 like a lot of story before you really got to the story. And so then I just said, okay, well, it doesn't belong in book 1. It doesn't really fit in book 2. So we'll just make a book 1.5. If you don't read it, it's not going to hurt you terribly. But there's characters that are introduced that come up later. And there's things that happen in that book that affect things in book 3. So it's
I'm
fun.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's fun. I mean, it's fun to create that and to set these things in motion. And I refer to my map a lot because I'm like, okay, where is that? Okay, so how long is it going to take them to get there? And I kind of know how far people can travel in a day, and I map stuff out all the time like that. So it's also realistic that people spend time traveling. It's not one of those where they're in the south, one day and the next scene they're in the north.
at the top of the mountain.
Yeah.
I How much does setting play a part in how you nuance and you use the subtleties of moving the story forward? Because I got to imagine not all the terrain is the same, and the seasons are probably different as well within the context of the map that's right behind you there. So, how much of that are you thinking about, and how much does that play a factor in how you move these characters forward?
In the first two books, almost not at all,
Okay,
because most of it takes place
in one
on the
location.
trip on the
Mhm.
trip to Foresight, and then within Foresight itself.
Yeah.
So because of that, there's not a lot of traveling and there's not a lot of terrain. When you talk about book 1.5, there's a little more of that comes into play, where they're traveling through marshes and they're traveling over kind of rolling hills,
Mhm.
and the pitfalls or hazards or whatever you want to say that causes. But book 3 now will have a lot more terrain involved, and yeah, because they're well, shoot, I can't go too far into book 3.
Yeah.
Um, book 3, there's a lot of traveling involved and a lot of traveling of an army. So
Mm.
the logistics of moving an army over a great distance and supplies and everything else comes into play.
Well, for a history buff like yourself, I would imagine you know as well as anybody, especially during a wartime, how important weather and terrain becomes for a battle. Even
Yeah.
it turns the tide of many wars. It's turned the tides of many wars in our history. So
Oh yeah, don't have a land war in Russia and the Europe in the winter. It's
yeah,
kind um, so yeah, and weather and terrain in the battles.
yeah,
The terrain doesn't much because it's pretty much plains where they
uh-huh.
are fighting. But the weather definitely has an impact because it is plains. So when it
Yeah,
rains, it does slow the army down and reduce their mobility, especially the mounted troops.
yeah,
Um, so and especially the things that the oxen and wagons, those are almost slowed to a crawl when it's super muddy,
yeah,
and that affects not only where you can go, but I mean even the one people that are mobile, they can move up, but if they don't have food and everything else, then they're just kind of stuck there and they're not going to do well. So yeah, that that comes into play. Maybe not as much as I'd like, but I don't want to.
somewhat.
I don't want a 600-page. I'm not trying to write War and Peace, but that's definitely something. The weather and especially the river. That's something that's they face.
Yeah. Anita is here. Hello, Anita.
Hi,
Nice to see
Anita.
you. Uh, yeah. The other thing about that, right, is you're writing what is essentially a love letter to fantasy. You're a big fantasy guy. You wanted to endure this genre, and you wanted to do it in the manner of what you kind of, from everything I've gathered in talks we've had before and interviews you've done here and elsewhere. You kind of wanted to pay homage to the things that you remember and grew up with and experienced that made you want to be a writer. And
Hmm.
so with that responsibility comes great with that power comes a lot of great responsibility, really. I mean, it because there is so much involved with world building and with being true to that fantastical element. I find a lot of authors, especially modern ones, who grew up on Tolkien and grew up on you know
C.S. Lewis and
yeah, Cromwell and all these, where there's a lot of battles and there's a lot of covering of the world where you're going on epic journeys and things of that nature, that they struggle with the idea of how much do I burn into the book and how much do I burn outside of the book that I just keep to myself, that kind of helps me develop that. Was that something that you wrestled with a lot early on?
yeah. So First of all, my magic system all kind of originated from an old D&D game that
Nice.
a friend of mine ran, and I just thought it was a cool magic system,
Uh-huh.
and so I stole it. I mean, I
You
borrowed.
borrowed it.
I got his
You
permission.
borrowed from it.
I asked him, but you know, here's the thing: is in when we played D&D, that was the magic system and kind of the
Mhm.
religion,
Yeah.
but it was it was kind of more than that and kind of less than that. But I had to take it and make it into a coherent. You know, we were playing D&D, so
Yeah.
we didn't change spells. There weren't anything special that people could do.
Yeah.
So we still use the D&D rules and the D&D spells and all that. Well, under my magic system, a lot of them just don't make sense. So I had to figure out to how to incorporate what magic I wanted to have in the book and how to build that into this magic system. And the magic system is also the religion, dominant religion.
Hmm.
So kind of it's really hard because if it's a religion and all your priests are using the same spirits that your mages are using and your
Yeah.
bards are using, you have to have a rationale for why everybody can't, you know, create flames or gouts of fire or lightning or whatever.
Right.
So I had to build that into the story. And, you know, for example, one of the things I say is air is the easiest um, spirit to use.
Mm.
And I say, which is why even bards can use it, you know, and it's a joke in the book, but I'm trying to explain that, you know, the bard magic is a lot of air spirit and
A lot
not
of
so
hot
much.
air sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So a
That,
little tiny bit of fire.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I was driving you there. So because the thing I recognize in the book right away is there is, I mean, even though, like you said, you're trying to cater this to a broader audience, so there is tameness to it, there is subtlety to it that tames it a lot toward a younger audience, maybe not so lost or feel like this isn't for them aspect of it. But there's also some nice little sarcasms and a nice there's a lot of there's some of who I know you to be in that book a lot.
There's a
And
lot of Easter eggs.
yeah, that too. And so for you, is that where you kind of put your stamp on it? Is that for you? Is that the most personal aspect of it for you?
Um, yeah, that is a very personal aspect of it.
Hmm.
You know, there's a lot of things in there that actually are just for my gaming group
Uh huh.
that nobody else
I love that.
will. You know, there's six of us that will understand the joke, and everybody else is just part of the story. And then there's a lot of stuff that's kind of pop culture for my
Uh
generation.
huh. Yeah.
That that you know you people might appreciate,
Yeah.
and then and then some of it might miss it, and you might read it 2 years later and catch it. You know, it's just made to do that.
Yeah.
And I tried to be somewhat subtle with that and not draw too much attention to it, but you know,
Yeah.
I do it quite a bit in the story. And you know, big reveal. Read the names carefully.
Yeah, I when anybody asks me to describe Alejandro Rising, I always say, and its author, I always say, well, Daniel's kind of the Jim Gaffigan of fantasy writers. You have you're clean, you're very wholesome in a lot of respects, but you're also there's also some adult humor in there that is very funny, and like you said, there are Easter eggs that kind of chime into your perspective of where you grew up and how you grew up and the culture that you were around.
Hmm.
So uh but yeah, the other things that I really find fascinating about your approach is the details matter to you tremendously, and they mean something. Every little detail that you've fostered into Rising means something. You know, from the armor to, you know, just like the weapons that they use, the things, the magic, what, like you were mentioning, the air and being a part of that. And so for you, how much does authenticity matter? How much do you spend honing and nuancing those little details? Is that something that's specifically something that you work on in a draft, or at a time when you're trying to write, you know, polish it up?
So yes and no. I get a lot taken out by the editors, because I guess I'm like Tolkien in that I'll spend 3 pages describing the woods.
That's
Uh,
fair. That's fair. I think we all have that gene. A
um,
little bit.
so that has been a criticism that I work
Yeah.
on. But yeah, these guys are guys in armor, and
Yeah.
one of the things that I when I read fantasy is, when you're talking about armor for a person, it's like, oh, he's wearing chainmail and he's, the arrow pierced his breastplate. And it's like, wait, is he wearing plate or is he wearing chainmail?
Yeah.
Um, and if he's wearing both, state that he's wearing both.
Yeah.
And I get into probably a little bit too much detail on the pieces of armor. But in that, I'm trying to explain to people as well how, these people's armors is designed, from the bottom up to protect them. And it's covering them. And, that was one of the other things that I always, thought was funny is like when you see shows and you guys got like a leather buckle showing. And it's like, oh, well, that's going to be my first target because I know as soon as I break that leather, he's got a piece of armor that's loose. So and I was in the Society of Creative Anachronists. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but
of course, yes.
We lived.
That's for people who don't know. That is the people who do kind of like the LARPing and things.
Yeah,
like
it's medieval reenactment. We say the Middle Ages as it should have been. And I learned to make armor, and I made a helmet, I've made a knife. I've never made a sword. I've never made a breastplate. But I've made clamshell gauntlets, and I've made vambraces, and I've made stuff. I made a full suit of leather armor. And so those kind of details are very important to me. The other thing that I go way too much into is probably food and describing the dishes. But I love to cook, and so that's another one of my,
it's great. It's great cross promotion. I know I have an author friend who she based her entire promotion because her book is a fantasy book that takes place in a bar, and basically the bar is the central, hub for this.
Mine.
Yeah. So she created a whole line of drinks, and she went on TikTok and made these drinks for the book. So it's like that makes a lot of sense. So a lot of good cross promotion. Maybe we'll have a Alondra cookbook or something out there for.
I was actually thinking of doing that, a
nice.
Wyvern's Airy cookbook, or John's book of recipes, and doing that as a little giveaway, when you bought the third book or something. I don't know.
Nice. That's a great idea. Yeah. Anita says that and an arrow may or may not penetrate plate depending on the quality.
Yeah, and that's one of the things too is most arrows did not penetrate plate.
No.
Historically, plate mail, that was what was great about it, which is why Knight survived so much.
Yeah.
The guys in the plate mail, unless it hit like in the neck or somehow got, in the armpit, it generally got deflected or stopped. And I did a lot of research on this online, with guys firing longbows at 50 meters and the one thing they said was most of the arrows were made with soft. They weren't hardened. And basically, the only time arrows got through, even the bodkins got through, was if they were hardened.
Yeah.
So arrows are not an effective thing against knights, but they're real effective against soldiers who are wearing light chain or leather armor
or arrows that are coming down on top of a person right through their skull, right?
yeah,
Something to that
yeah,
effect.
yeah,
Yeah.
and helms were a huge, uh,
Yeah.
really important because, and that's also one of the reasons why one of the most effective weapons was actually a mace or an axe, because even if it didn't penetrate, it
It
would
hurt.
still ring your bell. If you got hit in the head with a mace, it didn't matter that you were wearing a helmet.
Yeah.
Your head would rock back, you'd get whiplash, and you'd be hurting.
Plus,
Um,
plus the mace can go into a spot where us as men and even women will note it's a sensitive area that will hurt a lot if it gets
yeah,
hit there.
yeah. And with plate mail, I mean, especially on the legs and stuff,
Yeah.
you could hit somebody in the leg and dent their armor,
Yeah.
and it might not hurt them, but if it restricted their movement, that made them very susceptible to later attacks.
Yeah. Makes
So
sense.
yeah, maces. Although I ignore that totally, and everybody uses long swords, and a lot of people fight double longsword Florentine, which is totally historically very inaccurate. But in fantasy, it's the gold standard, so that's why I
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah. Sometimes tropes outweigh the reality of the situation, right?
Yeah,
So, you know, it's interesting to me hearing you talk about how you've come across these details. It sounds like to me a lot of your a lot of what you create and put into what you do is stuff you've experienced, like the D&D games where you've worked some scenarios out, larping, and doing the societal thing probably helped you kind of figure out what weapons do and how they work in certain aspects. And so is that fair to say, are you kind of a hands-on kind of detail researcher? Is that how you would look at it?
yeah. Well, I base a lot on the experiences I've had,
Hmm.
but then I also try to do like research on stuff as well.
Sure.
Um, for example, the arrows, because I was one that totally believed that longbows, you know, English longbows just drove arrows right through plate mail and killed people, and it was eye opening. And also, even the armor. I watched a lot of videos on both making armor, wearing armor, putting on armor, and that's the other thing that D&D is kind of silly
Yeah.
because it takes you a minute to put on armor. You be totally naked, and in one round, a minute you're fully armored, and it's like, yeah, that's
Yeah. No.
you didn't get armored by yourself unless you're just throwing on a chain shirt and a helm.
Yeah.
You needed somebody, and that's what squires were for, and that's why they had servants,
Yeah.
and yeah. So I've tried to incorporate that into the book as well. Just a little bit of the where either you're sleeping in your armor or it's going to take you a while before you can get ready to do anything.
Mm.
You can't just jump up. Oh, what did Anita say?
She said a wicked war weapon is a Beckley Corbin. That thing is a killer.
I'll have to look that up. I'm not sure what that is. Must be some sort of pole arm.
Yeah, it's similar. Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a lot to be said for searching the details out and kind of making sure that they're accurate as much as they are effective, as much as they are effective for the story and the character themselves too. I mean, you also have to take, I would imagine you take a lot of what your character traits represent, since you were a D&D player, into what they can do, right? I mean, not everybody can yield a longbow sword and be proficient at it and hold it up for a long period of time, those things get heavy, and they get, there's different things that, like a mace, throwing a mace takes a lot of strength, right?
Yeah.
So do you look at that as well? Do you make sure that your character attributes match whatever you're trying to accomplish with that?
I do not only the character attributes, but preferences. So,
Mm,
Braxel in the book always uses a sword and shield,
hmm.
you know, and that's his fighting style. And that's
Right.
what he's learned, and that's what he's comfortable. And some people, Lolark always uses a great sword. Um, Eric uses a rapier. So, because that fits their personalities and their fighting styles, and their physical attributes probably a little bit.
Hmm.
Most the army, they use spears because one, that's a real easy weapon to get proficient with. I won't
Hmm.
say expertise with, but it's real easy to get proficient with. And as far as weapons goes, it's very light and is balanced to where you can carry that for a long distance if need be. So yeah, and then the town guard. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you, Anita. Um, so yeah, and then the town guard, they use swords because
Hmm.
spears, if you're within confined spaces, aren't necessarily, when you're by yourself, the most effective weapon.
Yeah.
So it's basically partially on who they are and what the style of fighting they like to do or are likely to do,
Hmm.
and then also, as you said, on Lolark's 7.5 feet tall.
Yeah.
He uses a great sword because he can. You know,
Yeah.
Sibley's probably not ever going to pick up a great sword.
Yeah. Yeah. I the other aspect of deciding to delve into a fantasy world is you're basing it, even if it isn't based in a true time period where if you're creating something from scratch, you are basing it in a kind of um an age where that you're familiar with in history, and practical applications become part of that aspect of it as well. So how did you decide what era or age you wanted to base your, not just your world in, but your magic system and everything like that, and the limitations that you would be saddling your characters and the story with?
So there's actually several,
Hmm.
um, and that's kind of based on the race.
Hmm.
So most of them are, you know, 17th, 18th century, medieval pre-firearm.
Hmm.
Um, and then there's some that are, and that's medieval Europe,
Hmm.
right? Um, Medieval Europe. Some of them are, that period in maybe even a little later in Africa.
Hmm.
Won't say who that is. And then, you know, the dwarves are basically, the Holy Roman Empire at their height. It so each race kind of is based on a different kind of group. And yeah, I'm not original enough to invent those, so I did a lot of based on historic properties of them. So yeah, it's and it's kind of fun there too
Hmm.
to show the different cultures and how they interact
Hmm.
a little bit. And like the Grenlar, not so much in this book, the first book, but a little bit. I think I start to reveal the fact that the Grenlar are not evil little monsters, even though that's how everybody treats them.
Right.
So I start to get into kind of their culture and how they're organized and how they're set up, and over the course of the three books, that again they make to where they're better understood, and there's conflicting priorities because everybody wants to grow and get bigger, but there's somebody in the way.
Yeah. You know, for this show especially, really been dancing on genre a lot, and a lot of cross promoting genres and figuring, subgenres within subgenres. But for you, sticking to the fantasy realm, uh, I have to imagine there's a benefit for you staying in that kind of lane to kind of, I mean, you could cross over from epic to dark and every once in a while do some high fantasy with what you're trying to do, and then more historical fiction in as you've been talking about just now. But uh, do you find that because you've kind of felt like this was going to be a fantasy from the beginning, that you kind of that didn't hurt your ability to move this forward? You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I felt from the beginning that I had a story that could take place in this world,
Hmm.
and entirely within its rules, um, and be coherent and work.
Hmm.
So yeah, I not felt, like I said, I don't want to go too dark. I
Yeah.
don't want to go too romance.
Yeah.
If I do, I'm gonna get Madeline to write those parts, but it won't be on this series. But yeah, I'd love to do a fantasy series with Madeline, and no, I don't. But yeah, I mean, I really think that this series, I can tell this story with, completely, and stay within this realm,
Yeah.
and stay within this magic system, and stay. Although, keep reading, because things might change with this magic system.
Yeah, evolution is a necessary evil sometimes, right?
Yeah. Well, and so, without giving too much away, I love religion,
Uh-huh.
and I love you read Christianity, obviously, because I'm Christianity. So you go back and you look, and obviously it sprang from Judaism,
Hmm.
and even the pre-Canaanite religions, and
Hmm.
that's where we get, like, Baal is from the pre-Judaism.
Hmm.
Um, so it's very interesting to read that and see kind of how they evolved into what they
Hmm.
are now, and so I kind of incorporate a little bit of that into my religion of the four spirits as well.
How
And it's
much?
all explained, and it's all logical why it happens, but
Mhm.
it doesn't, it changes. I'll just say that.
So one of the things about religion that tends to follow it and tends to bring it into the forefront is politics. How much of the politics matter for you in terms of introducing the religion and keeping, putting the religion in there?
Well, they're very intertwined,
Yeah.
because there's this great prophecy of the elf, where there's a big war between the humans and the elf, and the four spirits stepped in and said, "No more." And they basically said to the humans, "If you continue to fight, we're going to wipe out all of your heirs,
Yeah.
and your line will be gone." And to the elf, they said, "You know what? You're going to be ruled by a human, even though it'll be an elf. They're going to have human form." And so they've been ruled by either a human or a half elf for like 1,200 years.
Hmm.
So they don't like that. they're, they're tired of this prophecy,
Yeah.
put it that way. And that's actually part of what drives the second book, the antagonist in the second book.
Hmm.
Um, and so I get into that. So yeah, they're very intertwined, because this prophecy is a huge thing, and it really is causing a lot of conflict. And there's a lot of people that um, don't. There's a lot of elf that don't like it, and now the humans are starting, because the elf are reacting to their dislike of it. The humans are getting frustrated because they're not holding up their side of the bargain. And so, yeah, it's creating tensions. So yeah, it's kind of a big part of the story. And if you listen to Miranda's song in the first book, kind of tells the story of from the royal family, even
Mm-hmm.
that the oldest son was an elf, and she had two more sons, and they assassinated her two younger sons
Yeah.
to guarantee that there would be an elf king. I mean, that's how frustrated the elf are with this prophecy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very intertwined. The politics and the religion, because of that, um, are very closely related. That's a great question. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Before we get into the questionnaire, I did want to talk a little bit about that thing behind you. And when was that kind of pro, I don't want to say prophetic because obviously you had a story in mind that you were looking at creating probably before the map existed, but how much of the map shaped what you were doing versus yeah, there you go. How much of the map predated what you are writing versus what you've accomplished, or is it been kismet with the two, or
Well,
have you had to change the map?
I haven't had to change the map,
Okay.
thankfully. Uh, so when I started writing,
Yeah.
or when I decided I would say, actually, so like 30 years ago, I started writing this book, and
Yeah.
I wrote a bunch, and then my computer crashed. I lost everything and didn't do anything with it. And then, 10 years later, I started writing it again, and I forget what happened, but I just kind of stopped writing it. And two
Mhm.
computers later, I didn't have any of the files. And when I finally, COVID hit, and I said I was laid off because of COVID. And so I was sitting there going, well, I'm not just going to sit and feel bad for myself. So I drove Lyft, and that paid the bills. And while I wasn't driving Lyft, I said, I'm going to finally sit down and at least start writing this book. And then I sat and I said, okay, so the first thing I got to do is make the map. I,
Mhm.
I got to figure out where this takes place.
Nice.
And, the thing is, this map, let's see, is that right side up? I
Yeah.
hope that's right side up.
It is right side up. Yeah.
Okay, so that, if you look up on the top and on the bottom, it's
Yeah.
actually, this is like a little peninsula sitting out that's entirely surrounded by water.
Yeah.
And to the west of it is a huge landmass. So this is like Europe. I mean, literally, it's like Europe.
Yeah.
And to the west is all of Asia. And to the south is, other places. So this is just a small part of the world right now.
Mhm.
And so I don't really plan to write any other books. But at the same time, I just didn't think it was realistic to have, something the size of Asia and have things happening in it that it didn't take years,
Yeah.
to go through. So I wanted to keep my continent, and that's, this is the continent of Droskara. I think I have that there. Yep.
Yeah.
See, I thought of this.
Nice.
So this is the continent of Droskara, but there's a lot more,
Mhm.
and in the world, and so I I wanted to keep it small and keep it like Europe, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure that there was more beyond that.
Mhm.
So the map came first, and then I mean, I kind of had the story in my mind, but then I started writing stuff with, calculating. Okay, how long does it take to get from here to here, and how many hers marks can you travel in a day,
Mhm.
and so those types of things came into play very very strongly while I was writing it. I mean, there's so many times I'm like, I've had so many paper maps. Had it originally drawn on a big piece of tag board, and I would sit there with string and measuring tape and sit there and calculate stuff out. And it's like, nope, that's too long. It's got to be closer. So yeah, it was a fun exercise, and I really think if anybody's going to write a fantasy story, they should start with the map,
Mm.
and then the magic, and then start your story.
Nice. Yeah, there's kind of a deeper philosophy for the idea that we're we think our world is so big and yet it is so tiny, right? That's just one piece of a world that you have in mind, that but you're basing your story in that aspect of it. So it is the biggest aspect to be seen, but it
Yes.
is a small portion of what really the world is existing in.
And really, if you look in the Middle Ages too, I mean, that
Yeah,
was
pretty much it. Yeah.
pretty much it. I mean, there's people that traveled all over, but
Yeah.
most people lived their whole lives within 20 miles of where they were born.
Yeah.
They didn't get out and travel, and so
Yeah.
that's where adventurers were so cool, and explorers and travelers.
And back then it took a lot longer to travel than it does now for us in modern times. So so it's usually it's you're uprooting your life if you're traveling that far of a distance,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah, you're taking months to go
Yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, even like we took a canoe trip from St. Cloud down to Minneapolis is 2 days.
Yeah.
I can drive it in an hour,
Yeah.
and we were going downstream.
Yeah.
If we had been going upstream, it would probably been 4 days.
Well, an
So
hour in good traffic, right? Yeah.
I can do it in 45.
All right. Nice. Nice. All right. All right. You ready to take the questionnaire?
Sure. I should have researched this. I have no idea what this is, but yeah, let's go.
All right. So we're about to do La Questionnaire, invented by the great Bernard Pivot and perfected by the awesome James Lipton for Inside the Actor Studio, and taken for the purposes of this show to torture my guests and butcher what these fine gentlemen have created. Daniel, what is your favorite word to write?
Oh, I like Alejandro now.
Nice.
My favorite word to write. I would have to be Alejandro because
Nice.
I do
That's
like
fine.
to like handwriting that. I do like to write it. Extraordinary is one of the words I like to use, but
Nice.
I think to write or type, I guess. Yeah.
Andre. Nice.
Otherwise, my name.
Awesome. What is your least favorite word to write?
Uh, to write or type or
Yeah, whatever. Type right. Yeah.
um. Boy, who thinks about these things? Uh, anything with a lot of R's and S's in it.
Okay.
Like Myers, I have a hard time because I tend to just scribble the end. Um,
Fair
so
enough.
when I'm signing books, I have to be very careful to, make that. Um,
Nice.
so
All right.
resilient,
F-
terrible. I mean, anything like that.
Fair enough. Fair enough. What turned you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Uh, let's see. Well, pretty girls always turn me on anyway. Um, smiling people. I being around anybody that's smiling and cheerful and happy just brightens my mood and
Nice.
makes me more happy.
So then, what turns you off?
Crabby people or things not where I put them. That's probably. Or the other thing is like when you ask a question like, where's my water bottle, and people respond, I didn't touch it.
Yeah.
That frustrates me to no end. It's like
Yeah, that's not the answer of the question, right?
I just want to know where it is.
Yeah. Um,
Not
okay,
accusing you of anything.
so everybody's favorite question here, and this will be interesting. What is your favorite curse word?
The one I use the most, which is
All right, fair enough.
uh,
That that's a universal.
it's just 6.5 years in the military, and I learned to use that in very many situations.
Sure,
And
sure.
I I do like I use shit ton a lot too.
There you go. That's a good
Um,
one too.
yeah, so that's a
Nice.
measurement.
All right.
It's more than a crap load.
Gotcha. What sound or noise do you love?
Kids laughing,
Nice.
like children,
Yeah.
children giggling or laughing. That's probably my favorite.
What sound or noise do you dislike?
Depends on the situation. Like in the middle of the night, I hate dogs barking.
Yeah.
Um, any other time, it's fine. Dogs bark. Uh, Other than that, probably just like loud engine noises.
Okay.
Like motors running.
Mm.
Oh no, you know what? That's not true. I don't care what it is. I hate white noise machines when I'm trying to sleep.
Okay.
That is that is my absolute least favorite noise.
There you go. There you go. What character of yours would put their face on the currency of their world?
Robin definitely. Fairwind probably. Um, all the kings and queens already do. um,
I was
but
gonna
yeah,
say you have that.
yeah, of my main group though, Robin and Fairwind are probably the most likely
Nice. So, what artistry would you love to try that you've never done before?
to try that I've never done or to
Yeah.
be good at doing.
No, just try it. Just go and do it one time.
I've done a lot of stuff one time. I guess I've never actually tried to write music,
Okay.
and that might be something that I would enjoy doing is composing um, music. I mean, I did the song in the book,
Uh huh.
and, wrote the lyrics, but I didn't really compose the music or write anything down. And my daughter, who sings it in the audiobook, actually uh, came up with a lot of the tune, or she adjusted my tune and came up with a lot of that. So, but yeah, writing some actual music would be fun, and not just like one line of tune, but you know, guitar, piano part, whatever.
Gotcha. What artistry will you never attempt?
Again,
Oh yeah, that's fine. Yeah, if you want
sculpting,
sculpting,
sculpting. I
that's
do
a
not.
popular one here. A lot of people have said that.
Yeah, I'm not even good at drawing. So like
Uh
two
huh.
dimensional, I'm terrible at, and I'm even worse at 3 dimensional. So yeah, it's I a man's got to know his limitations.
Mm. All right. So for you, I know this isn't as hypothetical as it might be for some others, but if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Give him a pass. Let him in,
Well, you
please.
know,
Please.
along those lines, you have an eternal life pass here at Go Indie now to always be in here, Daniel.
I
And I
appreciate it.
really appreciate you coming in and doing this show with me and talking the philosophy of hero. Really, I mean, you were the right person to have this conversation with. So I'm really glad we had the opportunity to do that. So thank you so much for being here and doing that with me. So.
It's a great pleasure. I appreciate you having me on and giving me this opportunity to talk to you. We haven't talked before, so this was a lot of
Yeah,
fun.
yeah. This is our first one-on-one, so that's pretty
Yeah.
cool. Uh, tell everybody where they can get this wonderful book of yours and the book and a half, where everybody might be able to find it, and where they might learn more about what you're doing in the future.
You can get it on wyvernsairy.com. That's wyvernsairie.com. You can also find it on Amazon. The audiobook is also on Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or wherever you buy audiobooks. And the books are on Barnes and Noble and anywhere you can buy books. Book 1.5 is only in ebook form, but if you see me on Facebook, look me up on Facebook. The Knights Trials is a group on Facebook. I've been known to give free copies of that away to anybody who wants it.
Yeah.
So, Facebook. I'm on Instagram at, I think, author at Dan Myers, but author at Wyverns Airy is the best way to get a hold of me. I look at that every day. I respond to everybody who sends me emails, and as I said, I give away a lot of freebies to people who order from me there.
Nice. Yeah. The link is already in the description, everybody. So don't worry about writing down how to spell it. It's there. And you can just click on it and you'll be right where Daniel wants you to be. And he's got a contact page on his website too. So it goes right to that email as well. So everybody go check that out. And thank you so much for joining us. And we'll be back this weekend. This weekend Indies season premiere, and we've got other stuff going on this week. And we'll be back next Monday with another 21 grams, everybody. So thank you so much. And remember, that's always time to go indie now. We'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody.